Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, What Life Was Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Comu. He personally offers and leads public and private tours, as well as presentations of historical sites within communities throughout the state of Massachusetts. Currently, the communities he has chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the St. John's Congregational Church, located in Springfield, Massachusetts. So tell us of the early history of the church.
Its early history is such that, like a lot of congregational churches, it cannot start from scratch with a ready-made church building to go to. And St. John's Congregational, same situation. They actually started earlier than the church would give away. And that start was 1889. And what they did as a small congregation, they used a simpler buildings along the way. For 22 years they did that. All right. And those were close to this location. The location is 643 Union Street in Springfield. It was 2 blocks away, 4 blocks away. And then they came here and they built their own church. They got enough money finally. And on April 16th, 1911, finally, the St. John's Congregational Church had a home of its own for good, a permanent home. And that was great because it was a very strong congregation in terms of they really wanted to succeed. Now, if you look at this building, it's gorgeous. I'm struck by how wonderful it looked. And today what we're going to talk about is the building behind it, which had many uses, a lot of uses at the same time. And we're also going to talk about where they hold their religious services. And then we're going to talk about the architectural style of this church. All right, so there's quite a bit to go on here. Now, very importantly, there was one minister that was the most instrumental of all in getting this church to succeed. And he was around for 31 years as head minister. His name was William DeBerry, D-E-B-E-R-R-Y. And he was that minister for a long time. Even after that year that he retired, he was still part of the Congregational and was still instrumental in trying to make it still a great church. All right, so that's a lot. And as always, I want you to read a lot about this church on my website. And there's actually another internet site that stresses this church. So there's a lot to read about this church because it was so successful.
And tell us about the parsonage behind the church.
All right, the parsonage behind it is from the year 1913. And it has somewhat the same look and color. It kind of fits in. It's called the St. John's William DeBerry Education Center nowadays. But when it started out in 1913, it was the parsonage. That was where the minister lived. But at the same time, it was also St. John's Parish Home for Working Girls. That means young girls that could not live with their family for some reason. Maybe they immigrated or came up to the north within the United States. And they couldn't live on their own yet, but they had jobs. And so they would live on the upper floor. Okay, and now the whole parsonage is in the colonial revival look. And I said it wasn't only just parsonage, and it wasn't only just the working girls' home. A third use was it was also a social hall, and there were some years it was all three at the same time. All right, and so that's quite a bit. And in fact, in 1933, the church purchased a new parsonage at 310 King Street, and thus the St. John's Parish Home for Working Girls would have more space because the parsonage was in a different location. And also the social hall was here, so they would have a portion of this building. So at times it was 2 things, times 3 things, then it went back to 2 things. It's heavy use, and it still is being used again. Remember I just said it's an education center named after that very famous minister that got this whole location up strong.
And really quick before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can find videos and podcasts of the stops along each of his tours, as well as photos and text of the historical sites throughout as well. And for private tours and other inquiries, you can email him directly at bobcat4214B@yahoo.com. And his tours make for fun, educational, outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, where do they hold religious services now?
Yes, since the year 2013, they bought a building that was across from the parsonage. And so now you have 3 buildings right together owned by St. John's Congregational Church. And that's a new building, brand new from scratch. And they've had it now for 11 years. They hold the services there, and they have most of the social functions there. They still own the educational center, the former parsonage, and they still own the old St. John's Congregational Church itself. So they got a lot of space, and it's still a very active congregation.
And tell us of the architect behind the church.
Yes, the architectural style of the church is a Gothic revival style. You can tell by the windows, and sure, that's important, and the tower is important, it has a nice look. But most importantly of all is the stained glass windows. Now this St. John's has beautiful stained glass windows inside, and the stained glass windows, 2 of them out of the, I believe there's 8 total, 4 on the left and 4 on the right side of the church, but 2 of those windows are on the Hancock side of the church, are windows in the memory of John Brown, the abolitionist. And I'm wondering if they're still there. Someone told me they're still there. If that's true, that's wonderful. So you have stained glass windows, not with a religious theme, but with a theme of a very important person in African American history in the United States, John Brown. And that's very unusual. And I hope if they're still there that they're well taken care of. I heard the church still has them there. I hope they do. And someday I want to go in there and get pictures of them for you, put them on my webpage here, and then talk to the minister and see if they're still being maintained at a high level. If they need any repair, the CPA, Community Preservation Act in Springfield, is very active, and hopefully they get money from them. Okay.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of your expertise. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can check out a large selection of other podcasts on his website, as well as on SoundCloud.com. And be sure to stay up to date with new podcasts and videos posted daily. Thank you for tuning in.